So we talked about, both of us have mentioned this abdominal diaphragmatic breathing. So I'm just going to move my camera down a little bit so that you can see more of me. Um,
Mhm.
First of all, I want to clarify, like the diaphragm, which sits underneath the rib cage and attaches to the lower ribs, and it's, all the way in the back as well in the front. There's more diaphragm tissue. It's a muscle, right, on the sides and in the back than in the front. And there's more blood flow in the lower lobes of the lungs than in the upper lobes of the lungs. So movement of the diaphragm increases, good movement of the diaphragm increases perfusion, the exchange of the gases, oxygen and CO2 from the lung tissue into the bloodstream, where it can be then delivered or deposited, right? Either from the body to the lungs in the venous system or in the arterial system, from the lungs out to our pinky fingers and toes and up to our brain. Okay, so we want to have more movement of the diaphragm, not less, because it is our primary breathing muscle. And there is no breath that is not diaphragmatic. Like, you cannot breathe without your diaphragm. If your diaphragm was paralyzed, you would stop breathing.
Mm.
I'm not going to go into it, but there's a fascinating experiment that was done a long time ago.
That's terrifying.
It wouldn't be legal to be done now, but it's really
Yeah.
super fascinating. Um, yeah, people volunteered to have their diaphragm paralyzed,
Oh my God.
and
Yeah.
they didn't ever get a call to breathe. So
Mm.
every breath has diaphragmatic movement. The question is how much, how full. Like, it's a muscle, like any other muscle in your body. You want it to be strong and have some, flexibility to it. So the diaphragm can be weak, it can be hypertonic, it can be sort of like just chronically stressed, like people have a lot of hypertonicity in their neck and shoulders, largely, I want to say, because they just breathe. There is no
Mm-hmm.
chronic tension in the neck and shoulders, in jaw, TMJ. If the breath is not being addressed and the breathing pattern is not being addressed, I don't care how much massage, which I love, right? And how much yoga and how much whatever you do to work the muscles, if you don't change your breathing pattern, I guarantee you that's driving that bus, because those muscles are hypertonic. They're just chronically tense and tight. So abdominal diaphragmatic breathing is about utilizing your abdominal muscles to support good full range of movement of the rib cage, which um, supports and assists good diaphragmatic movement, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
a way of conditioning the diaphragm and supporting that idea of low, slow breathing, getting out of the chest breathing pattern. And I'm a kind of an efficiency person. I like, like I'm busy. People are busy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you can do more than one thing simultaneously, all the better. I'm big on core, and it turns out that the transversus abdominis, which is one of the primary core muscles that helps to stabilize and support the lower back and the sacrum, also supports that movement. It also attaches on the top edge to the rib cage, and it moves in the same direction as the diaphragm. When the transverse abdominis contracts and pulls the ribs in, it supports the diaphragm moving into its resting position. And then when the transversus abdominis relaxes and the ribs move out, it supports the diaphragm in moving fully into its full range and spreading the ribs out, moving down and out. So when we incorporate those movements, link them together, it helps to increase the diaphragm's range. It increases more of a parasympathetic response. It strengthens your core, and it gets you out of chest breathing, paradoxical breathing, reverse breathing, which is another dysfunctional breathing pattern. And all of that is supported by nose breathing. Nasal breathing
Mm-hmm.
and more activation of the diaphragm go together. Chest breathing and mouth breathing go together. It's part of our wiring. Because when we're chest breathing, we might be having to call for help or run like the bejesus away from the lion. So they go together. It's stress breathing, right? As opposed to everything's chill, we're okay breathing, which is nasal, low, and slow. All right, so that's a little, sort of precursor for why we're going to do what we're going to do. So I'm going to have you all, and Brett, you're going to be my little guinea pig here. So hand on your chest, hand on your lower rib cage. And just take a few breaths to just notice where you feel movement in your body. So this is everybody out there in listening land, right? You're all doing this. So this isn't a spectator sport. Get on in there, get in the breath pool with us, and observe your own breathing pattern. First of all, notice if automatically you go into nose breathing and you have a nice lip seal, or if there's a little bit of space between your lips, and can you just touch them together? Just soft touch of the lips. And then notice if the breath is moving up and down, the direction of movement. Notice if it's moving out and in, forward, back. How would you describe it? Get to know your breath. Invite it over for tea and say hello. And notice if you feel movement happening under your upper hand or under your lower hand or some combination. Noticing if you feel the breath has a steady quality to it, or if you've got like a couple of short breaths and then a big breath, without judgment. Like I always encourage people to just observe everything without judgment. Just notice. Like if you're not able to get to know what you do, what your pattern is, how do you know how to change it? Right? It's like trying to get somewhere on a GPS system without knowing what your starting point is. Okay, that's where you're going, but where are you coming from? Right? It matters. So getting to know, and you can put your hands in a variety of places, right? Side ribs. Do you feel any movement? Do you feel any out in movement, or does it still feel up down? Do you feel lots of movement in your belly, but not really in your rib cage? Do you feel it in the back? You can put your hands on the back. And also right side and left side can feel different. I mean, the lobes of the lungs aren't the same because the heart sits to the left, so the left lobe is smaller. But then you might have a particular condition that means one side of your body breathes more efficiently than the other. So there's so many, like we could just do an hour just on that, just breath awareness. And I highly recommend it. Like when you're sitting, when you're standing, when you're lying down, you could just you're in the shower. How am I breathing? You're chopping vegetables. How am I breathing? You're sitting in the car, in traffic. Put one hand. Where am I breathing? What's happened to my breathing? Okay. So now let's have you move your hands so that you have one on your lower belly and one on your upper belly. So you still have that awareness with the upper hand of the space between the ribs. And we're going to work with the space between the ribs. If you halfway through the book, you got to the diaphragm, which is that's chapter 6, the middle of the book. It's all there's a lot in there with the diaphragm. I love the diaphragm. Anyway, and this zone of apposition, this area right here, and the movement of the diaphragm. So again, you might notice as you are inhaling, there's an expansion of the belly, and as you're exhaling, there's an internal sort of contraction. And you might feel more under your lower hand or more under your upper hand. And some of you may be like, I'm not feeling that at all. I feel like when I breathe out, my belly goes out. When I breathe in, nothing much happens. Or my belly goes in when I breathe in. That's an indication of paradoxical or reverse breathing, and something that I highly recommend you pay attention to and start to transform. So let's have you imagine that as you're inhaling, you're inflating, like you're inflating a balloon, like really stretch your belly, the whole of the belly as you breathe in. And then as you exhale, I'm going to have you say shh. You don't have to put your finger here, but shh. That's it, Brett. Keep going and going and going and going and going, and see if you feel like you're squeezing the air out of that balloon. Like, can you feel the contraction of the abdominal muscles coming in and of the rib cage? You want one low, one high, so you can feel what's happening. You want the ribs also to kind of tether in. And then close your mouth, and inhale and expand, and then again, Now I know I said, no mouth breathing, don't mouth breathe, and now I'm teaching you to mouth breathe. This is training wheels, where it's not, it's a means to an end, right? So to get the felt sense of that core engagement. Now, once you have that feeling of the abdominals, kind of like you're zipping up a tight pair of jeans that just came out of the dryer, that feeling, right? Once you get that feeling, which is the engagement of the transversus abdominis, what you want to do is go back to nose breathing, but still work with the abdominal muscles out as you inhale and in with that zip in and up as you exhale. And then if you feel like you want to go to the next level, just pause and hold that contraction for 3 to 5 seconds. And see then if you can, in a very relaxed, an ungraspy, unurgent way, inhale. So if you feel yourself going, okay, and going into a gasp, then only maybe a 1 or 2 second pause after exhale till you build your capacity up. So it's the expansion, chest to belly or lower ribs to pelvis on the inhale, and then the zipping in and up on the exhale. And oftentimes I'll have people use the shh as a mechanism to help them to find that transversus abdominis. I have a number of different exercises, several of them in that chapter 6 and 7, on how to work with the core muscles to support the movement of the rib cage in. What I want to say about this, are you still working with it? Right? You working your core breathing? Mm-hmm. Good. Is everybody out there? You can still core breathe and listen to what I'm saying, I think. You can multitask a little bit. Okay. Which is this. Oftentimes people feel when they're breathless, like the problem is they're not getting enough in. And so then what they want to do is power the inhalation. And what they do when they do that is create a lot of tension and go right up into activating the chest, the shoulders, the jaw, the neck, everything up here. And what that does is actually it creates tension in the diaphragm and kind of fixes it. It doesn't actually move as wide and broad, and it therefore is not as efficient in its action. And then what happens on the exhale often is nothing. The belly just kind of stays flaccid and the ribs stay kind of locked in that not all the way open and not all the way closed position. And it would be like holding your arm in, like, okay, it's one thing if you're doing a bicep curl, right? And you're contracting and then you're extending and then you let it go and you go live your life. You don't walk around like this with it partially contracted and tense all the time. But many of us have our diaphragms fixed and locked in that midpoint where it's neither opening all the way or closing all the way, or drawing in all the way, so it never gets a chance to rest. And what that does is it creates a very hypertonic, chronically tight diaphragm that's weak, deconditioned, and that's going to keep trying to breathe you. So it starts to get into the whole thing of like, not enough, got to do more. And then you keep trying to get more in, and again, it's another way the biomechanics, right, keeps that vicious cycle going. So the engagement of the abdominals and this core action that's really supported by the sound and the tethering of the rib cage in, what you're actually doing when you do that is you're putting your diaphragm in a little bit of shavasana. It's like nap time. It gets to relax. You're putting it into its resting, It's passive resting position. And then when you let go of the abdominals, diaphragm's super smart. It will breathe you. It will automatically, if you focus on the exhale and the bringing everything in, like that zipping all the way up, high waters, then you will be able to breathe with more ease and freedom on the in-breath. It will happen by letting the abdominals go. And you don't have to effort through the neck, through the shoulders. And you will feel like you got that deep breath without making it a big breath. So there's an effortlessness to it. It's more efficient. Remember, it's lower, so you've got more blood exchange down here, better perfusion, low and slow. And then starting to lighten it up. You can put your finger under your nose and just titrate. Like, how much air do you feel brushing across your finger? Can you make it just a little bit less? And you're going to scale it back to that place of portion control, not to where it's pushing you over the edge and you start feeling panicky or gaspy, but like, okay, this is less than what I'm used to. This is a little uncomfortable, and always an and I could do this for 3 to 4 to 5 minutes. It's not my favorite thing, but I could do it. And you start to build your chops up to where you do that on a regular basis consistently, and your body will start to acclimate to less breath. It's the only way to get used to breathing less is to practice breathing less.